Hey guys, it's Kat and I'm back today to finally do my pregnancy, birth story, motherhood, baby Q&A thing. I said I was going to do this when I announced that I was having a baby, and this is going to be the only baby content I do on my channel because this is a beauty channel. It's not a baby channel, but I do know that a lot of people had a lot of questions and wanted to know a little bit more about my experience being a first-time mum and how my birth went and all that kind of stuff. So I really wanted to do this video, and I wanted to wait a little while. Baby's now about 3.5 months old. I will introduce you to him on camera. He's currently out having a walk with dad at the moment. So when they come back, I'll introduce that. But I thought I'll get some of the filming done and answering done before chaos hits the house. So that's what we're doing. So I did get a lot of questions. So I'll try to cover as many as possible, but most of them hit sort of major themes. So I definitely will cover those. But when it comes to some individual questions, I might not answer them specifically. I just feel like I'll be here for literally 5 hours and I can't do that. So yeah, if I missed your question, I'm really sorry. I will do the big themes at the start, and then I will try to cover some sort of random ones at the end if I get around to them. But I might do this in like logical order. So like why I decided to have a baby, what the pregnancy was like, my birth story, naming, breastfeeding, all that kind of stuff. All right, so first questions are about why I decided to have a baby. So we have here from Mariah, how did you decide it was time for a baby? I'm going to butcher this. Ardunio172, when did you know you were ready to be a parent? Is it something you've always planned on, or was there a point later in life that you decided parenthood was right for you? Then Shax asked, how did I reach the final decision to take the humongous, lifelong, financially straining commitment of having a kid? So I actually did have to decide on whether or not I wanted to have a kid because I'm not the most maternal person in the world. Neither was my mum before she had kids, but she was a fantastic mum. So I knew that if I was to be a mum, I'd be fine at it and I would really enjoy it. But I didn't have that sort of like lifelong urge to have a kid. But I am 34. So I thought, look, it's getting to a time where if I wanted to have kids, I need to start thinking about it seriously now. And I also know a lot of people that struggle falling pregnant. So I wanted to try to have a kid before it was too late. And the decision really came down to, well, firstly, I think we're sort of comfortable with our lifestyle, so I knew that we could financially do it. I also knew that working from home, I can sort of balance work and being a mum down the track a lot easier than if I was working full-time in an office. So I thought, everything sort of lined up really well. But also ultimately decision was, in 10 years' time, if I didn't have a kid now, would I regret it? And I don't like sitting with regrets. I much prefer to give something a go if that's what I want to do. And I thought, yeah, probably in a decade's time, if I didn't have one, I would probably be upset that I didn't have one, so may as well give it a crack. So that's why I decided to have a kid. All right, he's woken up from a nap, so he's home and he's around. So this is my baby. So this is Sebastian, and he's coming up to 4 months old, which is crazy. And he's great. He's a really happy baby. He probably won't smile on camera unless we get his dad in the background making faces at him. But at the moment, his favorite hobby is drooling and and sucking on his hand. But yeah, this is my chickie baby. He's a big boy now. And he acts very, very big. Wants to sit up all the time. Can you see yourself in the thing? No? He loves screens, whereas like, no screen time, but he always is fixated on screens. What are you doing? Lip smacking. Boobala. Booby. Can you see yourself? But yeah, just a brief introduction to him on camera, because he gets very restless, so he gets bored. Doesn't like just sitting still, do you? No, can't sit still. Does not like that. So Exactly. All right, so back to the questions. So I had a couple of questions about what it was like to get pregnant. So this is from Rosie. She's 9 weeks pregnant with her first. Congratulations. And she said she tried for over a year. It was so isolating and put so much pressure on us. But she thinks the lockdown helped. Then she asked what was my TTC journey, so trying to conceive journey. We were probably unofficially trying to conceive for probably a year before we fell pregnant. It's a difficult one. I didn't have any issues falling pregnant, but it just took a long time. So sometime in 2018, I had like a positive pregnancy test and a delayed period, but then it was like a chemical pregnancy. So it didn't progress any further than that. And that was the time where we were like, okay, that happened. And I was like, okay, we need to decide, do we want to give this a crack or not? And we decided, yeah, sure, we'll give it a crack. So probably from that point on, it took a year. It was about 6 months of just seeing where things went, and it didn't go anywhere. And then it was 6 months to 7 months of tracking my periods with the Flow app and, trying to have sex on the times of the month where you're most fertile. So it took about 6 or 7 months of doing that to then fall pregnant. So we didn't have any issues. It just wasn't a fast process. All right, Tiffany asked, how far along was I when I first discovered that I was pregnant? And were there any symptoms that suggested it was the case aside from my skin issues, which I mentioned, and I'll talk about skin a bit later on. Christy also said, how did you tell your partner you were pregnant? I had a question before about like how I told Haley. And I found out I was pregnant because I was tracking my period and we were trying. So I think a lot of people, because I don't talk about trying to, and this is not just online, this is in my personal life as well. A lot of people, because I didn't verbally tell them we're trying to have a baby, people just assumed that we weren't. So when we did announce that we were pregnant, a lot of people were shocked and like, wait, how did you know? Were you trying? What? Like all this kind of stuff, was it planned? So there was a lot of people that I think were a bit surprised because I don't tell them my sex life, and if it didn't come up in conversation, I didn't sort of disclose that information. But because we were trying, I took a pregnancy test when my period was 1 day late, and then it had a faint positive line. That was a Friday. I remember I sent a text message to my partner saying, looks like I'm pregnant. And but because we had that before, we didn't take it too seriously. I wanted to wait a little bit before we did take it took it seriously. So I waited about a week before I went to my GP, got the blood test done, did all that kind of stuff, got referrals for scans. And it was only really when we got the scan and they said that everything was viable at week 7, that it's got a heartbeat, it's got all that kind of stuff, that we're like, okay, cool, this is actually like legitimately a thing. And that's when I told people like Haley, for example, and my mum, and I literally just said like, so can't drink this week, Actually, the first person I told besides my partner was Simon, and that was the day after I got the pregnancy test. He knew about the last one, so again, I told him like, don't expect too much, don't get your hopes up, because he was very excited about the idea of me having a kid. But I told him because we were going out for drinks with a friend, and I pretty much said, you have to like just go with it, pretend I'm ordering like gin and sodas or something. I'm just ordering soda water, just pretend it's alcohol because this is what happened. So that's who I first told and sort of how I told them. But I really tried to sort of minimize expectations at the start, knowing that, it might not take. But yeah, I think I found out at like late week 4 or something. So I found out really early on, and I was looking out for my period. So, that's how, there was no early symptoms that suggested that I was pregnant. It came sort of maybe a couple of weeks after all the sort of symptoms. So I had a lot of questions about how my pregnancy went, and a lot of questions about cravings and any food aversions. That's what I get a lot in real life as well. Whenever you tell people that you're pregnant or that you just had a baby, they're like, oh, what crazy cravings did you have, or food aversions? I didn't have any. I honestly had the most boring pregnancy. Some of the most cliche symptoms of pregnancy I did not have. So for example, I was not at all sleepy. I didn't have any naps. If anything, I slept less. I used to wake up in the middle of the night wide awake and be like, oh, this is strange. I used to go to bed fairly late, wake up earlier than normal. So I was an anomaly where I actually was more awake than before I was pregnant. I wasn't at all emotional. I didn't cry once during my pregnancy. And like I'd sometimes discuss it with Simon, who's my best friend. I would say that like if it wasn't for me actually physically looking pregnant, he wouldn't have even known I'm pregnant because I act exactly the same way. So I wasn't highly emotional. I didn't vomit once. I didn't have morning sickness. The only thing I did have, which was probably the main symptom I had in the first trimester, was I was hungry all the time. And to the point that I would have to eat every hour to 2 hours, and I had snacks with me at all times. And if I didn't eat frequently, I would start feeling a little bit like I've got hunger pains, not like vomity, nausea pains, but I just feel like I'm starving and my stomach's like eating itself and I'm starting to feel a bit sick because of that. So I had snacks with me all the time, and it was quite annoying because in my first trimester, like a lot of people talk about possibly losing weight or staying the same weight, I probably gained like 5 kilos because I was eating all the time. So that was my main symptom. I did get a bit of sort of hormonal breakouts, so little tiny pimples. That was in my first trimester as well. But overall, my pregnancy was pretty cruisy. I went to all my checkups. Someone had a question about what's the system like in Australia, because I mentioned my GP or my doctor and my midwife. In Australia, you see your GP, like your doctor, and they refer you on to a hospital. So if you go, I want to go to this hospital, my local hospital, I want to go private or public. I went to the public system and it was a fantastic experience, and they link you up with their midwife service. So I had my GP and I had the midwife, and pretty much I'd go to my GP for things like referrals, prescriptions for any medication or anything I needed, and then I would go to the midwife for the sort of, it was like at the start monthly checkups, and then it went to like 2 weekly checkups where they would check the heart rate, check the bump size, explain to you the process of what's going to go on and what's happening next, and they would do some other further tests and whatnot. So there were sort of 2 branches that I would be dealing with. So I did say I had no cravings or food aversions, but I did have quite sensitive smell. So one thing I couldn't have in the house in the first trimester was onions, because I would smell them all around the house. Like in the middle of the night, I'd wake up and I could smell the onions that I've got in the cupboard in my kitchen on the other side of the apartment. I'm like, I can just smell onions all the time. So I could also smell bin smell all the time. So yeah, first trimester, I had a sensitive sense of smell, but nothing like food related. I didn't vomit once, like I said. So I was pretty lucky in that regard. The main symptoms I had throughout my pregnancy, the main sort of annoying things that came up was I had acid reflux a lot. So probably from about week 20, I had acid reflux all the way to the end. I had like swollen legs, swollen sort of ankles. And I would really recommend getting like something like Birkenstocks where they're like open and quite wide, and you can also adjust the size of them, because it meant that some days where I didn't have swollen feet, I could tighten them. Other days where they were particularly swollen, I could loosen them. So comfortable shoes, slip-on shoes were really, really handy. And then also there was a couple of weeks where baby he must have been when he turned, he was sitting on my sciatic nerve. So for about 3 weeks, I had really bad like sciatica, but he must have shifted off it because that ended up going. So my pregnancy was pretty cruisy all along. But towards the end, and this is going to lead into the birth story, is probably where things got the most annoying. So of course, when you're heavily pregnant, it is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to sleep. It's uncomfortable to move. You get like pelvic pressure. Luckily, I didn't get back pain. I did do prenatal Pilates for probably from, I think, week 16 or something. I think that helped a lot. I could still paint my toenails to the very end. 41 weeks pregnant, I could paint my toenails. So I do think prenatal Pilates helped a lot when it came to just feeling comfortable and sort of preparing your body for birth. If it wasn't for the pandemic, I'd be doing postnatal Pilates, but I'll wait until they open up. I think when it got to about week 39 was when you start getting like particularly uncomfortable and you're sort of expecting baby to come. But my baby didn't want to leave. And I reckon it's because he hated the cold. When he first came out, he used to like get so upset at cold weather. I had him at the end of autumn, so leading into winter. So it was pretty bad timing. But I always just joked that he didn't want to come out because he was too cold. But I ended up having to get him induced, and I had a few questions about induction. And I know it's got a sort of bad stigma, and it must be in other countries where they sort of force you to get induced at a certain point. But I can tell you that where the hospital I went to, it's an option, and I took the option for a few reasons. So baby was 41 weeks, 4 days. So he was 11 days overdue, and there were no signs that he was planning on coming anytime soon. So I do think he probably would have gone well into 42 weeks. And what ended up happening, because my hospital is really good and the care was really great, I would have to go in every 2 to 3 days to get monitored. So what happens when babies are sort of overdue is your placenta can stop working, and it increases the risk of having a miscarriage. So I didn't want that risk. So I was driving to the hospital every 2 to 3 days. I'd get there at like 8 a.m. as soon as the sort of area opened, and they would have to do monitoring on me, check baby's heart rate, do a scan to check like the fluid levels in my uterus just to make sure nothing's going wrong. And it just got to a point where it was getting a little bit too like things are probably going to start going bad. So when they gave me the option, and they only give the option into like halfway through week 41, I took the option of getting induced. So yeah, it wasn't something I wanted to do. It wasn't like I'm going into pregnancy being like, oh, I can't wait to get induced. But when it came to the safety element of it, also it was getting so uncomfortable because he's literally nearly 2 weeks overdue, and he was a 50th percentile baby. He was like bang on the mark with weight and whatnot. So he was just getting bigger and bigger. So it's more and more uncomfortable. I kept trying to go for walks to try to settle him and like get things happening. Wouldn't work. Tried everything under the sun. Didn't work. And also it was just really sort of stressful waking up every day and being like, I don't want to plan anything because today might be the day at any point that I might go into labor. So I won't do work. I won't do this. I won't do that. I won't stray too far from home. And it just got really sort of stressful having that mentality from like, probably I was mentally prepared to have him from about week 38. So then it was about a month of every day waking up and every night going to bed being like, all right. And you live your life in limbo. And then of course you get pestered by people every single day being like, is baby here yet? What's happening? And you're like, I will tell you when baby's here. All right. I'll tell you. I'm not hiding this from you. Please stop reminding me that I'm overdue. And people are like, what's wrong? Is anything wrong? Well, and you're like, calm the fuck down. So I'd recommend that if people in your life are pregnant and you haven't heard from them, don't pester them. They will let you know. Like it's hard enough for them having to mentally deal with the fact that there might be something wrong or the baby's not coming, whatever it is. They don't need constant reminders of it. I just found that really sort of stressful, and I was getting a little bit stressed, and I'm not a stressed person. Like throughout my whole pregnancy, I took everything, I just roll with the punches, and I wasn't at all stressed. So, towards the end, I was getting a bit like, come on. So when they did call me and say, we can book you in for an induction, I was like, yes, please. And I booked in for the next day, and I got induced that night. It's a long process, so it happened overnight and then led into the birth. So let's talk about birth story, because my birth story wasn't the best. I did have a few people ask if I had a birth plan. I didn't have a birth plan because I just sort of roll with the punches, see what needs to be done and just do it. Ideally, I would have loved to have spent a lot of my labor in the birthing suites in the hospital I went to. They all have like a big sort of bath. So it's like a sort of, not a spa bath, but like a big bath that you can sort of relax in. And you can either choose to just relax in that while you're in labor, or you can give birth in that. And I was like, look, I love just hanging out in water. So I would love to do that. That's my ideal. I'd love to just chill out in a fucking big spa bath, just ease through the contractions and then have birth in water, and then great, would be lovely. Didn't happen that way. Firstly, it's not available if you're getting induced, because you have the drip and you have all this monitoring, because I have to make sure that the baby's not distressed when you're being induced. So it just wasn't an option to be in the bath. So my induction didn't really didn't really go to plan, I would say. What ended up happening was they broke my waters, which was fine, but the baby was sort of in a position where it blocked, must have caused a bit of a seal because half the water drained and then half wasn't draining. So my body didn't really react like it normally would, thinking that its waters had been broken because it still had a lot of water in there. So I think because the sort of water breaking didn't work according to plan, it took them a couple of hours to realize that. And it was only because the oxytocin drip that I had wasn't triggering labor like it was supposed to. So it's supposed to trigger contractions, and the more they use, like the stronger the contractions. And one reason why people don't like to be induced is because they go from sort of like nothing to like later stages of labor pretty fast, and it can be sort of hard to deal with. Whereas I was in early stages of labor and contractions for 10 hours before I actually got into like the real proper labor, so the active labor. So my active labor was 6.5 hours. So I was in labor for 16.5 hours, which was a lot longer than I was sort of expecting in that process. And then of course the induction was even before that. So it took a long time in hospital. When I actually got into active labor, like things were fine, but it got to a point towards the end when like the business end was happening that baby's heart rate was dropping a little bit. So of course the doctors come in, the sort of specialists come in, and they're all checking everything out. And I, like throughout the whole time, like I didn't have an epidural, and whenever anyone has gone through something similar to what I've gone through, they're all like, thank God for the epidural. And I'm like, I didn't get one. And they're like, what? I think going through labor had really cemented in my mind that I've got a really high pain threshold, because what I tend to do is I just sort of zone out. I for some reason I could just go, like, I don't meditate or anything, but for some reason I can just go to another place and just zone out. And it was quite funny because whenever a new sort of doctor or specialist will come in, they'll be like, so when did she have her epidural? And the nurses are like, she didn't. And they're like, what? And they're like, yeah, she's just like that. So yeah, I was pretty calm throughout the whole process, which was lucky that I could do that. But yeah, so towards the end, when his heart rate was dropping, they're like, we need some intervention. They gowned me up in case I was needing to go get an emergency cesarean. Luckily, because I hadn't had an epidural and I could push quite like strongly, I guess, they ended up just needing to use the suction to help sort of guide him out, because I had to lie on my back, which is not a very natural way to give birth these days. It's hard, like the baby has to sort of go up, which is harder. So just to guide him out a little bit, they needed the suction, but they were like, we need to do an episiotomy if that's okay. And I was like, look, you got to do what you got to do. So luckily they did the anesthetic, so I didn't have to feel being cut, which was great. And then baby did come, which was great. But in the process of him coming out, I did get tearing in my pelvic floor muscles. And so not only did I have stitching that needed to be done externally, but I had to have internal stitches. And because that was like an emergency situation, because I was bleeding, and I lost about 1 liter of blood, that was probably the most painful part about the whole process. I had baby on my chest, but they had to do emergency stitches without anesthetic because it was an emergency. That was definitely the most painful part of the whole labor. Like labor was hard and it was tiring and it was long, and it was uncomfortable, but definitely being sewn up internally without anesthetic, I can say was the most painful part about it. But you know, we got there in the end. Because it was a long process and because I did lose blood and whatnot, I was quite surprised that by the end of it, I was really sort of weak and really sort of like felt really defeated. And the most bizarre feeling, having this big baby in your belly and then all of a sudden they're out and like your core muscles just haven't sort of gone back to normal. So you feel really wobbly and really weak. And I hadn't eaten since breakfast because with the contractions, like if I was eating anything, I'd start feeling a bit sick, like I wanted to vomit. So I was just like, no, I can't eat. So I remember like I had him quite late, and I remember I had a shower at about midnight. And I remember hearing somewhere, someone said that like after you have a baby, the shower is like the best feeling ever, like just washing everything off. And I remember going, okay, shower, cool. I had to use the shower chair because I couldn't stand. And I remember I just felt so weak. I was just like hunched over. I was just bleeding everywhere. And I was just like, I felt so defeated, and I couldn't even get up off the chair. I had to call my partner to get the nurses to get me some sandwiches and some juice because I could not literally walk. So they had to put me in a wheelchair and take me up to the ward. The care was great. Everyone there was so professional, and I just keep thinking I can understand why people die in childbirth, because if I was at home without any assistance, baby would have probably died because I couldn't get him out on my own. And his heart, he was also a little bit tangled in the cord on the way out. That's why his heart rate started dropping. And I probably would have died from blood loss. So I was just like, yeah, they do. This was just like every day for them. This was considered a normal birth, which was bizarre. I'm like, it's the most traumatic thing that my body's ever gone through. Luckily, it wasn't traumatic mentally. I do know a lot of people that say they've gone through a similar sort of thing and they found it really stressful, and they think back and they didn't, it sort of traumatizes them. Luckily for me, I'm pretty headstrong. So for me, I just think of it being like it was traumatic for my body, but mentally I was fine. But it did take me a good week to not feel wobbly and weak. It was really hard standing up after getting stitches, and I was pale for about a week, and it probably took me a good month to fully recover and feel like I'm myself again. So it was pretty traumatic on my body, and it wasn't the most pleasant birth situation. But I know that, looking back at it, it was just a day, and everything was fine. Like, my end result was I want my baby to be healthy and I want to survive it. And we did. It was all good. And baby is perfectly healthy. So, tick, tick. I don't look back and go, it was a really bad experience, but I do understand that it was, it was a difficult day. The thing that happened after that I'm going to talk about is, and no one asked about this because I don't know, but this is sort of relates to breastfeeding. So I thought I'd just touch on the fact that after we went home, after a couple of days, baby got really bad jaundice. So like extreme levels of jaundice. I did flag it with the nurses on the phone, but they couldn't come and check him. There was restrictions with COVID and the lockdowns and stuff. So by the time they did come to check him, which was a couple days later after we got home, his levels of jaundice was almost off the charts. And that was probably the hardest thing to deal with as a parent, as a parent in general, but also first time parent. You've got your baby, you've come home from hospital, and then all of a sudden you have to go back into hospital. And we were in there for, I think, 4 days, and it was over my birthday, and it was just really difficult. We couldn't spend the first few nights with him. He had to be under the lights. Luckily, the treatment worked really well. Otherwise, he was going to have to get a blood transfusion. So luckily, he responded really well, especially also being a bigger baby. They said that he was really robust and bounced back really quickly, which was good as well. If he was preemie, it would have taken a bit longer. But we were in the neonatal ICU unit for 4 days with him, and that was probably harder than the labor. So yeah, I look back and I think, okay, yeah, labor was hard, but having a baby that they're saying there could be health complications, he could have brain damage from it, all this kind of stuff was much harder than the labor. Luckily, they did all the sort of tests and the screening, and there's nothing wrong with him. It was just a bad combination. And the combination was, and this is sort of just unfortunate, because I lost blood, my milk supply was coming in late, so it couldn't flush out the bilirubin that causes jaundice. So he wasn't flushing it out of his system fast enough. Also, because he did use the suction, he didn't have a bump on his head, but he did have a bruise. So we were actually warned by the nurses that because he had the bruise, he's more likely to have jaundice because his body is having to process the bruise and heal the bruise as well as processing the bilirubin. And so chances are he's going to struggle processing bilirubin and have jaundice, which he did. And then also he's got a genetic predisposition to it on Darren's side. All right, just had to take a quick lunch and boob break. So I'm back. I feel like this video is going to have like 14,000 breaks because that's what it's like now. To film one video takes all day. Anyway, so pretty much because of that experience with the jaundice, and I wasn't able to breastfeed him when my milk did come through eventually, it finally came through. he was under the lights and I couldn't even hold him, and we didn't spend the night with him. The first 2 nights in hospital we didn't spend with him. So I ended up having to pump every 4 hours to try to get my breast milk in, but it didn't come in completely. So that is sort of like a bad outcome of that. Firstly, blood loss caused not much milk and delayed milk supply, and then not having access to my baby. And people know that if you don't use your breast milk, your body stops producing it. So even though I was pumping to try to get it through, it didn't come through completely, and it's been a struggle for the last 3.5 months. Pretty much I did want to breastfeed exclusively if possible, but it just I haven't been able to because I don't produce enough. So I'm still glad that I'm still breastfeeding some, but pretty much from his first week of life, we have to supplement him with formula, and it's just because of the circumstances. There were a few questions about breastfeeding and like how I choose to do it or whatnot. Now, I did want to breastfeed exclusively because I know that you pass on antibodies and you get all the nutrients, and it's good for the baby. I don't have a problem with formula. My baby pretty much has like maybe 3/4 formula and 1/4 breast milk, but I am still trying to get some breast milk into him because of the antibiotics that I pass down. Like if I have to switch to being exclusively formula, which I know I'll have to do at some point, I'm not upset about it, but we have to pretty much do both, which means it's a lot more time feeding as well, and it's a lot more complicated, but I choose to at least keep trying. So that's my sort of issue. I did want to breastfeed, but circumstances didn't let me. And I could also do a video on ways to increase milk supply. None of it actually has worked for me. I'm on medication. I've taken supplements. I eat oats. I drink a lot of water. I take bloody lactation tea. I've made lactation cookies. I've tried all these kind of things. Nothing really works except for maybe the medication. I'm not too sure, but I don't know. It's my body just didn't want to do it. The last thing I think I might touch on about the birth, because a few people were like, "Are you scared? Were you scared?" Or like something that concerns people. And I have to say, I wasn't necessarily scared of giving birth. I wasn't looking forward to it, if that makes sense, but I wasn't scared of it. And I don't think it is something to be scared of. I think you just have to sort of go with the flow and trust the system. I've worked in hospitals before. I've never actually been admitted to hospital except for when I was in labor. So I've never actually been in a hospital as a patient, but I've worked in hospitals for years, and I wasn't scared because I knew that everything will be fine. Well, I was hoping everything would be fine. But I was apprehensive about it. I didn't look forward to it. It wasn't an experience I'm like, I can't wait to go into labor, but I wasn't actually scared of it. A few people have asked if I would do it again. And I think the aftermath of having to bring your baby into hospital because your baby's sick was actually a lot scarier than me, because I can deal with it. I'm like, I'm fine. I can deal with shit that comes my way. It's more like emotionally harder to deal with your baby being unwell. So would I do it again? Look, I probably would. I wouldn't look forward to it, but I don't think I'd be scared of it. I don't think it's a scary process. It's just a tiring process, a very physically tiring process. I had a few questions about his name, and then I'll probably talk about what it was like to be pregnant and have a baby in a pandemic, because I know that is something that a lot of people have asked questions about. So a few people asking how I got the name, and did I have a short list? Did I have any, was named after anything? The answer is no, he wasn't named after anything. I did have a question from Angela asking if he was named after an anime, and I haven't watched that anime, I'm sorry. So no, he wasn't named after anyone. Naming is a really hard thing. So the process, we actually had 2 names in mind. I had a name and my partner had a name. And what we ended up doing was not announcing his name in the first 2 days of him being born, because we wanted to sort of get a vibe of what we thought what he felt like. And then we ended up deciding on the name that I liked. Now, I did have sort of a short list, but it got narrowed down very quickly to Sebastian, because the other names that I had on my short list were either names that like I might like a particular name, but then it's like, oh, we've got a friend named that, or my friend's dad's named that. And it just sort of, I didn't want a name that I already had sort of an association with. So I needed to find a name that I didn't know anyone who had that name. I don't know any Sebastian. So for me, that was like a clean slate. So that was the one that always stood out and kept coming back. Even when I read like lists of names and whatnot, that one kept jumping back out as being like, it's a clean slate for me. I like the name. So that was my name that I had on my shortlist. Darren had one on his shortlist. I'm not going to say what it is, because if we decide to have another kid and if it's a boy, we'll probably go with that name. But yeah, like I said, we ultimately was sort of tossing up between the two and just wanted to get a vibe of the baby first. So yeah, we sort of messaged people, photos and stuff when we had him. And then I think it took 2 days for us to be like, by the way, here's the baby and this is his name, because yeah, we wanted to get a vibe of what he felt like first. All right, so questions about having a baby during a pandemic. So like, for example, Jaden said, how was your experience delivering your first baby during a pandemic? Jaden also asked if I wanted to move into a bigger place since our family's expanded. We've been wanting to move to a bigger place for quite a long time now. The houses in our area are all $1 million plus houses, so we can't afford that. We might look at in the next year or so moving further out so we can actually have a bigger place, because we do, yeah, it's been on the cards for a long time. We sort of wanted to do it before baby came, but we just couldn't afford it. So yeah, we do want to, it's just hard to do it right now, especially with the pandemic, and like job security is not the best, so it's quite a difficult time. Christina asked, how did you handle close friends and family that wanted to visit during the global pandemic? She's due in a few months and is trying to figure out how to go about it. Good question. Kelly Stowe 11 asked, she was wondering how the pandemic has affected me and my partner's enjoyment of becoming new parents. Elizabeth asked, did I miss out on anything, any of the normal pregnancy experiences like a baby shower or having apartment in for appointments and scans? Do I feel more isolated before and after birth because of COVID? And a lot of questions about lockdown and how it's affected, how nerve-wracking was it to be pregnant during the pandemic, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of people wanted to know, and it is a very, topical issue. I was very lucky that when the pandemic hit, I was in my 3rd trimester, so it didn't stop me from doing anything. We had lockdown, I think, about 2 weeks after I went to my birthing classes. We'd done all the scans. My partner was able to come to all the scans. My mum came to the 20-week scan along with my partner. I didn't have a baby shower because I chose not to. I don't like the idea of telling people to come over and just give me presents. So I chose not to have a baby shower, but I was able to have one. I think we went into lockdown when I was probably about 36 weeks pregnant. And I think it was actually good. It was good timing, very, very lucky. I did have a bit of anxiety about the no visitors in the hospital. My partner was allowed to be there and he stayed the night with me because we had a private room, which was good, but we weren't allowed to have anyone else visiting. I was more worried that I had heard a friend of mine, her 2 sisters are in the UK and were giving birth around the same time, and they weren't even allowed to have their partners there. And that really concerned me, not having him there. But when I got confirmation that the hospital was letting partners there, I was fine with it. So yeah, I was it was lucky timing. The hospital felt very secure and they were testing everyone that came in, and there weren't many people in the hospital at the time. So I wasn't concerned about going to hospital. It was hard with the visiting thing. Luckily, I think it was about 3 weeks after I gave birth, our restrictions lifted and we could get visitors. So babies met pretty much all his family, except for my cousins and aunts and uncles and stuff. He's met his cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents, obviously, and he's met them quite a few times. So he was luckily allowed to do that. And also in the first couple of weeks, it was actually good timing because in the first week, we had to go back into hospital anyway, and that was a really tough time. So when we came out, we just wanted to sort of rest with baby. And I did have my mum pop by a couple of times to provide, to bring food and whatnot. So for caregiving purposes, she did pop by. So, we did see a little bit of core people providing care for us. But when the restrictions were lifted, we were visiting family every week. So we'd see my partner's side of the family, my side of the family every week. So for about 6 weeks, he got to see family and friends quite a lot. And I was okay with people meeting him as long as I knew that they were sort of self-isolating at home and they weren't amongst any like risky demographics. Now, in that time, we only had a couple of hundred cases in all of Australia. So the risk of being close to someone that had COVID-19 was very, very minimal. And as long as they hadn't been exposed to someone with it or had been traveling, I was okay with them meeting baby. But then the cases start to increase and we're back into lockdown. Now, this is the hard part because he is now getting to a stage where he wants to like go out and do things and meet people, and he's recognizing people and he's forgetting people. And so this is the time where it's starting to go, now I'm really missing out on him seeing people. So it is a shame in that instance that he's not seeing his family regularly. And that does upset me a little bit, and I can't wait for lockdown to be over. But the silver lining, and this is hopefully if you're pregnant during this time and you're dealing with all these complications, and like we had a checkup a couple of days ago with the hospital. They wanted to check that he's developing fine after the jaundice, and everything seems to be going well, so that's good. But it's all that the teleconferencing calls and stuff, and whenever I need to talk to my GP, I need to have a phone chat and whatnot. So it is a weird time to go through this really big medical sort of change, and this, you're relying on the medical system, but you can't really be as immersed into it as you normally would be. So it is a difficult time. But the silver lining that I find throughout the whole scenario is that my partner's working from home. So normally he would have gone back to work around halfway through, but when baby was 3.5 weeks, because he had 4 weeks off, but he started just before I gave birth. Whereas now baby's 3.5 months old, and he's been able to see his dad like all day, every day, which has been fantastic. So it's been so much, like it's been so helpful for me raising a kid with a dad around. And also it's been really great for him and both of them being able to bond. So we don't split duties 50-50 because he has to work. So I have to look after baby most of the day, but he changes as many nappies as I do. He knows how to feed baby. You know, he can get up in the middle of the night, make a bottle, change baby, put baby. He's like fantastic. So the best thing that has come out of this is that I've had a lot of help from my partner, and he's been able to bond with his son really, really well. So I don't take that for granted, and I do think that the benefits will outweigh the negatives. So hopefully if anyone's going through this situation, if their partner's working from home, they'll realize that is an absolute blessing. So yeah, there's a lot of negatives to it, but and I didn't feel like the brunt of all the negatives. My partner was able to see all the scans and everything, so we got to experience that together. But yeah, in the end, it's been really, really great that he's been at home. All right, most of the questions I got was actually about how I'm dealing with being a mum, and you know, what did I expect from motherhood and what's the reality like and all that kind of stuff. There was heaps of questions about that. Look, I didn't have I did have expectations, but I think the thing that was most surprising is how hard the first 6 weeks are. My God, it's so difficult. And it's not that like I expected things to be like, oh, I'm going to be physically really tired because I'm not going to sleep that well at night, and you know, have to get up a lot of times and this and this and this and whatever. But the thing that I found the most shocking was how emotionally draining it is, and how physically tiring it is to have a baby with you all the time. So my baby in the first 6 weeks, I could not put him down. He would start crying. He's currently crying in the bedroom. He would just start screaming. It would be really hard to then calm him down later. So, you know, if you try to put him down to sleep during the day and you've got him to sleep, you've spent all this time trying to settle him and put him to sleep, you put him down and then he just starts screaming and you can't calm him for like another hour, and he's overly tired and then he's cranky all day, and it just wasn't worth it. So pretty much for the first 6 to 8 weeks, I was carrying him constantly. I was carrying him all day long. He would sleep on me when he was sleeping. And that was just really physically tiring. And also in the first 6 weeks before he was smiling, you spent all this time trying to keep this baby happy, but all you get in response was a crying, upset baby. And that was really emotionally tiring because you're so used to going, oh, I want to see the smile so I know that I'm doing the right thing, or I know that my baby's happy. But because he can't smile, you always think, am I good enough? Is he upset? Am I doing the right thing? And I just didn't realize how emotionally tiring that actually was. So I think as soon as 6 weeks hit and he started smiling, things got a lot easier. He also didn't just cry for the sake of crying. I also found it really hard and there was a few questions about what comments or questions did you not like getting? And I found it really annoying when people were like, enjoy this time. It's the best time ever. And I'm like, really? Really? Do you actually remember what the first 6 weeks were like? Because it's fucking shit. Like, it's really, really hard. It's really tiring. Also, you're dealing with things like a drop in hormones. I had the baby blues for about a week where I would just, whenever I was thinking about my life, I would just start crying. And that's just a drop in hormones. So it was a really hard time. Now when he's like 3.5 months and he wants to start rolling and he's fun and he smiles and he giggles and you go to change him and you're wiping his bum and he's giggling at you, this is the best time. First 6 weeks is really, really, really tough. I had someone ask about what books I read. I'll put a book on the screen that I recommend for mums. I don't recommend reading this before you have your baby, and I don't recommend reading it after 6 weeks. But in that first 6 weeks when you're struggling, this is a really good book because it's little letters that people write to themselves about what it was like in their first 6 weeks of having their baby. And you'll see that a lot of people are struggling, and struggles that you have, it's normal. And that was the thing that I found really hard, was that I'm like, I'm really finding this emotionally really, really hard. And I'm being told by a lot of people, enjoy it. It's the best time. It goes really fast. Don't, like, what are you complaining about? It's great. And I'm like, you fucking clearly don't remember what it's like to have a baby that won't sleep, won't settle, screams all the time, screams until they're not breathing and they're purple in the face because you're changing them. Like, it was hard, but it got a lot easier. And that's one thing that I really like. I still have to hold him majority of the time now, but it's got a lot easier. He's sleeping really well at night. So, it's become fun, and I can now put him down for 5 to 10 minutes on the floor on a mat. He can play and touch things and stuff, and I can quickly put away the dishes or something. So it's getting a lot easier as we go, but the first 6 weeks was really tough, and I didn't expect it to be that hard. So I think that's the biggest shock in motherhood, was just how physically and mentally tiring it is. And it's not the lack of sleep or the needing to change nappies or needing to breastfeed. It's just relentless. It's a lot of screaming in your face. It's a lot of not knowing how to calm down a baby, trying 1,001 things, and then just randomly they'll stop crying. Nothing you really did was stop them. It's just that's when they decided to stop crying. Whereas now, if he's crying for a reason. And I know his cries. I know when he's hungry. I know when he's getting tired. I know when he's upset because you're taking the bottle out of his mouth. I know the different cries. So it's so much easier to deal with him, and he's fun and he giggles and he smiles and all that kind of stuff. So that's the time that I think is really great, a few months in, but it definitely takes a good 6 to 12 weeks of just hard work to get there. So if you're in that zone, or if you're about to give birth and you are struggling in the first 6 to 12 weeks, it's normal. Someone did ask about what's some advice, good advice that I heard. My maternal child health nurse, when I was talking about that I'm really struggling putting him down to sleep, and I think at the time he was about 5 weeks old, she's like, he's too young. Like, you just have to do what you need to do to survive. And when he gets about 8 weeks plus, he'll start coming good and start responding a lot better to these things. But don't put pressure on yourself. Any small achievement that you've done during the day is a bonus. If you need to sit on the couch and watch Netflix with a crying baby on your boob all day long, if that's what you need to do to survive it, that's what you need to do. So that's the sort of advice that I appreciated, because I stopped putting pressure on myself that I'm like, oh, I'm not getting baby in a good routine. When they're too young, they're too young. You just have to survive. Just survive. And that's also where having a partner working from home is really good, because every day I was able to have a shower. Every day I was able to have breakfast, because I'd be like, are you in a meeting? He's like, no. I'm like, take baby for 10 minutes. I need to have a shower. And he was able to do that. So I think I would have struggled so much more, and I think I would have cried most days if I didn't have my partner home, because it is exhausting and it's very stressful, but it does come good. And he's such a gorgeous baby at the moment. He's such a giggly, cute baby, so fun. Like right now, his favorite thing to do is like to play on the floor, and like I can help him roll over and he loves it. So, you know, he's fun now. He's responsive. I know what he's talking about when he makes little sounds. So it gets a lot better, but it was a huge shock. Like I expected that he was going to like overtake my life. So that wasn't a surprise, but just the emotional, how taxing it is emotionally, I did not expect. Had a few questions about whether or not I would decide to have more kids. Now, the funny thing about it is, when I was going into this, I was like, look, I'll have one and we'll see how we go. But now that we've had one, we do have an idea of maybe in the next year or two, we're like, okay, maybe we'll give him a sibling, and that'll probably be it, because I'm in a family of 2, so that's sort of like the most I'm thinking of. But yeah, I went into it being like, look, I don't really care if he's a single child or not. But now I'm sort of like, no, it'd be nice for him to have a kid. So, you know, if it happens, like I said, it wasn't easy conceiving him. So if it does happen, it happens. If not, like I don't mind either way, but I am leaning towards we will give it a try in the next year or 2. Oh, baby purchases. A few people have been asking, you know, what have been the most useful baby purchases? What stuff do you actually need for a newborn? Did we get a bassinet, cot, feeding chair? What are some of the things you thought you'd need for your baby but haven't ended up using at all? So a few questions like that. Look, I would say, look, we do have a bassinet, a cot and a feeding chair. We tried to do things a little bit more. We didn't want to buy too many things straight off, and we wanted to recycle things as much as possible. So the cot is actually secondhand. We got it from a friend. Our pram is secondhand. It's not a bassinet, but it's a side, like a cot that goes next to the bed. It's a smaller version of a cot, and it sort of lines up with the bed. So it's like it's an extension of the bed. We borrowed that from a friend, and baby will be in that for about 6 months, and then he'll go into his big cot. He does have naps during the day in his big cot as well. And I bought a nursing chair because I remember we were looking for a new mattress for the cot, and I was testing out chairs, and I'm like, look, I need this. And I love my nursing chair. I use it when I breastfeed, I use it at night, and it's super comfortable, super handy to have. So that was my little splurge that I wanted for myself. So yeah, we tried to keep things as minimal as possible, but we've just been buying as we go on. We hired a car chair. We've tried to do things a little bit more environmentally friendly. We do have reusable nappies that we use during the day. We use disposable at night because he sleeps for about 6 to 9 hours, and the reusable nappies don't hold enough. It's not absorbent enough for that long period of time. So we do disposable at night, reusable during the day. We're trying our best to keep things minimal. But look, it's hard because I asked a lot of people that I know that have babies what are good recommendations, and I just find that babies are so different. You don't know what your baby's going to respond well to until you've got your baby. I've got a couple of friends that use like those baby wraps, and people in my mother's group use those baby wraps, and their babies love it. My baby hated them. My baby would be like, no, I don't want to be in this. He hated being like nuzzled here. He always wanted to look out over my shoulder or look out at front. So he didn't like them. He didn't respond well to them, but he likes the pram. He falls asleep in the pram. Whereas other people I know, their babies don't use the pram. When it comes to like toys and stuff, and like we only recently got one of those floor play mats with like the dangly stuff, and we didn't get that at the start because he hated lying down on the floor. If you put him down, he would lose the plot straight away. Within like 30 seconds, he'll start crying. Whereas now that he's a bit more, he's more developed, he likes being under there and playing with the toys and looking at things and looking at mirrors. So I feel like it just depends on the baby, and you don't really know what the baby's going to like until you've got the baby. So I would say start with your cot, your pram, your car seat. If you're going to bottle feed him at all, or your baby at all, bottle sterilizer, bottles. I did get a pump. I'm glad I did because it helped me get my breast milk in. I am trying to store some milk in the freezer for when inevitably my breast milk just stops. So, you know, I found those really helpful and I was glad I had them. So I think those are the sort of bare minimum. You definitely need like jumpsuits, super easy, cutesy clothes, like they're cute, but especially in a pandemic and you don't visit people, cutesy clothes, too much hassle. When he first came home, he hated getting changed because he was always really cold. So he hated getting naked. So we tried to we only used the sort of Bonds Wonder suits that had like the double zip and they were really easy to get on and off because we needed to make the process as fast as possible. So the basics you start with, and then as they sort of develop, you start looking at getting books and toys and stuff that they're going to respond well to. But I have things that like I was gifted. So right near me, I've got one of those sort of swinging chair things, those chairs that sort of mechanically swing. He couldn't use that up until only recently because he just didn't have the patience for it. So it's really hard to tell. One week a baby will hate something, but then the next week when they can, you know, cope with it, they might enjoy it. So yeah, I'd say start with the basics, but then build as the baby gets older. Another big question was how the cats are going with him. Did I do anything, you know, to introduce them? I made sure that the cats didn't sleep on his cot or his side cot or anything that he was going to be using because I didn't want them to feel like that was their territory and that he was going to come and impose himself in their territory. So I really made a point of keeping that really separate, keeping that door closed so they can't go in there. And you know, when we brought him home, they weren't fussed about him. And to this very day, they're not really fussed. Dirtles is really good with him. He can go and like pat her and sort of grab her and she doesn't care. Boogie is a little bit more apprehensive. He'll come up and sniff him and stuff and be fine. Like I'll be sitting on the couch with baby and the cats will be next to me and they're totally fine. But if he starts to like cry or carry on, he does get a bit like, So the cats have been fine. They sort of originally acted like nothing is wrong. There's nothing happening here. I'm going to ignore that there's a baby. And now they just sort of casually acknowledge him, which is fine. I'm cool with that. All right, so I think the last thing I'm going to touch on, because this is going for ages, is about skincare, makeup. So Millie said she's in the first trimester and her skin has gone haywire. Did your skin change and did it go back to how it was before? Madison asked, how has your skin changed through the process of having bub? Meg said, I'm curious about the skin and hair change journey. She's heard that hairdressers can tell the change of your hair condition if they're like a regular client. Lynn asked, how is your skin behaving during pregnancy? How has it changed after? She also said, what cosmetic ingredients are you excited to be able to use now that you're not pregnant anymore? Meg said she just found out that she's pregnant. She's really curious about skincare. She uses quite a bit and doesn't know if some of it isn't good for baby and you know what I learned about the subject. So there's been a few questions like that, and I've had that throughout. Like ever since I said that I was pregnant on my channel, I think the biggest question has either been about the cats or skincare. Now my skin has gone back to normal. At the start, I was, like I said, I had sort of breakouts, but that just ran its course. It flared up occasionally throughout pregnancy and has gone. My hair didn't actually change. Now I was talking to my hairdresser and she was like, just wait until you have your baby, all the hair that, essentially what happens is because of all the hormones, your hair doesn't shed. So you get much thicker hair. And then once you have your baby, all that excess hair that should have shed in the last 9 months, all of a sudden sheds all at once. That didn't happen to me. Madeline, that didn't happen to me. So what happened, like I said all along, my hair doesn't feel like it's any thicker. It doesn't feel like it's any better. And nothing has changed after pregnancy. So that was another thing that didn't happen for me during pregnancy. I did get a lot stronger nails. And the funny thing about it is I look at my nails now and the tips like halfway through, they're thicker. And I can see where after my baby came, my nails are now thinner. So I'm going to be very upset because I had really thick nails that I could clean and I could do things and I could, you know, do anything and my nails wouldn't chip and they'd be long and they'd be awesome. And that's never happened in my life. I get splitting, annoying nails and I know that they're coming because I can see where they're growing out, which is really weird. So I did get much thicker, nicer nails. Hair didn't change. Skin was not glowing. That was a question, or that was a comment that used to annoy me because people would be like, oh, you're glowing. I'm like, I've got acne and I'm dull as fuck. The only reason I'm glowing is because I'm using a lot of highlighter and illuminating products. So that was one thing that used to frustrate me. It was like, oh my God, you're glowing. I'm like, did you see me before? because I was way glowier than I am now. That's a fucking myth. But when it comes to skincare, I actually didn't change my skincare. And the reason I didn't change my skincare, shortly before I fell pregnant, I actually reduced a lot of my active ingredients that I was using because they were causing my sensitive skin to be quite red and irritated. So I dropped down with a lot of actives anyway. So I wasn't using much to begin with during my pregnancy, and I didn't cut down on things like retinols, shock horror, because the retinols that you buy over the counter, they actually don't affect the baby. They're in such small quantities and in such a small area of your skin, and they don't penetrate to your bloodstream. They actually don't do anything. The retinols you need to be careful about are the ones that you take orally. So vitamin A's are really, really bad because they can cause birth defects. And I would also be cautious if you're using prescription level retinols. The over-the-counter stuff, if you use that once or twice a week, actually isn't that big a deal. So I didn't actually change my skincare at all because I wasn't using high concentrations of things and I wasn't using them too frequently. So I just stuck with the same skincare routine. So yeah, I'm not excited now that I can use certain ingredients because I never stopped. And yeah, so some people can be overly cautious about that stuff. I was a little bit more relaxed, and I would look into things, I'd research things, and I'd ask, my doctors and stuff like that. And yeah, from my research and from what I heard from professionals, the retinols that you buy over the counter, they're fine to use. So people are asking how my makeup routine has changed since having a baby. I think the main thing is that I just don't wear much makeup. I don't have time. I'm holding a baby all the time. Stick products have become a bigger thing in my life. So I might hold a baby in one arm, have a mirror, quickly chuck on some stick product, blend it out, stick product on the eye, blend it out, mascara, bit of brows, and off I go. But yeah, I just can't wear makeup as much as I used to. I also don't wear as much fragrance anymore because I don't want to bombard my baby with fragrance. I don't wear much base products or lip products because I don't want it to smear on him. But yeah, I only really wear full face like this if I'm filming. But yeah, so I just don't have time to sit down and spend half an hour to do my makeup. It just doesn't happen. All right, I'm gonna have to get going. I've got the kettle on because baby is crying in the other room. He needs a bottle, so I'm gonna have to leave it there. I just want to thank everyone for all the questions and the kind words. And yeah, I've been meaning to do this for a while, and I'm glad I've done it. Hopefully it was helpful. I did want to get around to a few more questions, but it's just too hard with the baby, so it is what it is. But yeah, thank you so much for everything, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.